Hey, anybody got some Alka-Seltzer? I could use a couple of glasses of it right now because I am sick to my stomach, all right? It's true in football that the teams with the best players don't always win, but it's the team who plays the best that won. Kansas State deserved to win this game. The Oklahoma Sooners, and this seems to be a trend, as grateful as I am, Bob Stoops and that coaching staff, I will always be grateful for those guys because they do a terrific job. Tonight does not change that. And I do think highly of Landry Jones. Even though he played a bad game on Saturday night, I still think of him highly. Tonight doesn't change that either. Before we break down the game, again, congratulations to the Kansas State Wildcats. Mentor finally beats student in Norman. Talking about Bill Snyder beating Bob Stoops in Norman. First time that that's ever happened. Also the first time ever that OU has lost a home game in the Bob Stoops era against a ranked opponent. Remember when Owen Field, Gaylord Memorial Stadium, whatever you want to call it in Norman, used to be unbeatable for any opponent? And now we've seen the Sooners lose a couple of home games in less than a calendar year. Well, so much for invincibility at home, huh? But give credit to Kansas State. The Wildcats knew entering this game that they, had to execute their game plan and couldn't deviate from it, which meant that they had to be able to run the ball effectively, whether it was Klein or whether it was Hubert. Hubert had a monster game tonight for K-State, so you have to commend him and that offensive line for that, especially in the fourth quarter. K-State also knew that they could not beat themselves. They had to keep penalties to a minimum and turnovers. How about 0 turnovers for K-State? Very, very big stat in their upset win. They were a 2 TD underdog in Norman on Saturday. Didn't matter, though. They didn't beat themselves. OU had 3 turnovers. K-State had none. And then number 3, they had to make it as difficult as possible for the Oklahoma offense to move the football. What a better way to do that than when your drive does stall, have a terrific punter, which they do, and they were able to pin Oklahoma deep. I don't know how many drives the Sooners had where they were starting outside their own 20 or at times outside their own 10-yard line. It seemed like a marathon for the Sooner offense to move the ball because they had so much ground. They had so much ground to try to cover. I don't think there was one drive tonight where they started at around the 40-yard line. I think there might have been one where they started maybe around their 35 or 38, something like that. But K-State won the field position battle. They were able to control the ball. They kept the turnovers to 0, and they kept the penalties to a minimum. That game plan had to happen for Kansas State to win this game, and that's exactly what happened. To give themselves a good shot at a win, and that's what they did. So I congratulate K-State, and I also want to give a shout-out to Nathan for KSU, one of my longtime subscribers. In fact, one of my original subscribers when I started doing these videos back in 2009. I know he's got to be tickled pink after what his purple and gray did to the Crimson and Cream on Saturday night, and that is pull off a gigantic upset. And so, Nathan from KSU, congratulations and good luck to your team for the rest of the year. So, now that we got that out of the way, for Oklahoma, this game was sickening. Mistakes, mistakes, mistakes. That's what my byline was for this video because there was just too many of them. It made me so sick to watch these mistakes that I wanted to throw up more than one time. It was bad. No wonder I need Alka-Seltzer right now. Great teams don't beat themselves. Great teams don't beat themselves on national television. Great teams don't beat themselves against ranked opponents. We saw too much of that from this Oklahoma Sooner team. 3 turnovers leading to 17 points. The Oklahoma defense, by and large, played a good ball game. It's just that it looked like in the fourth quarter, K-State was pounding them. It looked like OU was starting to wear down. Wasn't their fault, though. Oklahoma offense moved the ball but couldn't execute. Moving the ball doesn't mean anything if you cannot execute. That first drive, which I thought Josh Heupel did a terrific job in mixing the plays up. We saw the running game work. We saw Whaley, and I thought Dominique Whaley had a heck of a game for Oklahoma. We saw him. We even saw Roy Finch on the opening drive. We saw Damian Williams do quite well. The Sooners were doing a good job of moving the football on that opening drive. But even then, Landry Jones was still not hitting his passes with the precision that he needed to. Wasn't hitting his receivers in stride. Kenny Stills, I don't know how many times he had to make up ground in order to catch a Landry Jones pass. The ball was being thrown behind him and other receivers way too often, and if it weren't for Stills, that first drive probably wouldn't even have led to a field goal. But the Sooners had a first and goal, the 10-yard line, get a wide open tight end over the middle. Landry overshoots him. It would eventually lead to 3 instead of 7. Entering this game, the Sooners were money when it came to being inside the 20-yard line. 10 for 10. As in 10 touchdowns out of 10 red zone possessions. And we'll get into more of the red zone when I review my 4 keys to the game, because that was one of my keys to the game. Finish what you started, meaning get touchdowns, at least get field goals, but get something. And when we break this item, when we break the red zone key down a little bit later on, it's going to be a pretty bad grade, because that was one of the things that costed OU. But it wasn't just turnovers. It wasn't just not taking advantage of the red zone. It was other mistakes and where they occurred. Landry Jones is a senior quarterback. Landry, what were you thinking in the second quarter? 3rd and long, deep in your own territory. You're rolling out of the pocket. Be aware of your surroundings. Throw the ball out of bounds. Even if you have to take a sack, punting on 4th down is a lot better than fumbling and giving Kansas State a touchdown. A detrimental play for Oklahoma. It gave K-State the lead. It was a big, big play in the game and a major mistake. Last year, there was no excuse against Oklahoma State. Careless with the ball on 2 different occasions, both leading to Cowboy touchdowns. And you think Landry would have learned from that. And instead, coughs it up again. Gets hit from the blind side. Ball squirts loose. Touchdown, Kansas State. Last season, Kansas State had so many close ball games. Nearly all of them, they won. And I guess some things never changed. But don't get me wrong, Kansas State deserved to win this one. But it's not just Landry Jones, okay? Blake Bell, all you got to do is concentrate. And yes, we're talking about 2nd and goal from the 1-yard line, the Belldozer, which turned out to be a doozy because Blake Bell could not handle the ball. Don't get 7, you don't get 3, you don't get squat, and Kansas State recovers and then drives it about 85 yards the other way and gets a field goal and takes precious time off the clock right before halftime. It was mistakes, mistakes, mistakes. It made you mad, it made you sick, it made you want to throw something at the television if you were an Oklahoma fan. And again, you give credit to Kansas State, and again, I know Landry Jones has had a terrific career. Tonight doesn't change that. But it was a bad game for Landry Jones, and it was a bad game from the Oklahoma offensive perspective in terms of not taking advantage of the opportunities that presented themselves. They didn't do that in full, and then 4th quarter in a tight ball game, remember Oklahoma's defense had been on the field for a while, and after a while, you start to get a little bit tired of chasing Collin Klein and chasing John Hubert and having those big K-State offensive linemen pound on you. And one of the most disappointing things tonight, even though I thought the Oklahoma defense played their hearts out, I thought defensively David King did a good job in terms of rush defense. I thought that Tony Jefferson from his defensive back spot did well. Aaron Colvin, he had a good game too. But they could not get pressure on Collin Klein. You know how a lot of quarterbacks like to throw the ball like this? That's how most quarterbacks throw. When Collin Klein throws, not to dog the guy, but it looks like he's throwing darts. It doesn't matter, though. It's just like Charles Davis, the Fox analyst, said tonight. As long as the ball gets from point A to point B, that's all that matters. And that's exactly what Klein was able to do, large part in that second half, in particular in the 4th quarter. And K-State was able to retake the lead and then put the game away. So you commend K-State, but the Oklahoma mistakes were too glaring and too big of an obstacle to overcome, even at home, for the Big 12 opener. Just a shame. And by the way, on the offensive side, too, I know it wasn't a great night for those guys, but I do want to commend a couple of guys, all right, in the losing cause. Dominique Whaley and Shephard. Shephard is the future of Oklahoma. He is something else. I thought Trey McGuire was going to be the main freshman. Right now, it's Sterling Shephard, and he appears to be the number 2 guy to go to for Landry. Of course, number 1, Kenny Stills, which again, in that first half, we saw Landry really favor quite a bit, but Stills, after a good first half, was kind of quiet in the second. Going over the 4 keys to the game that we highlighted on the weekly matchup show earlier in the week. Key number 1, contain Collin Klein. I go C in this situation. As far as running the ball, Klein did not do much tonight. But late in the game in the trenches, he didn't necessarily have to. He had John Hubert, who had, I think, over 120 yards rushing to take care of that. And then in the fourth quarter, Klein was able to find receivers, and that led, of course, to K-State retaking the lead. And then they would eventually rely on Klein's arm once again to help run up the clock at the end of the game with a critical first down when OU was out of timeouts. Key number 2, Landry protection program. I go B in this situation. The problem tonight wasn't the Oklahoma pass protection, which we had seen some problems with that in the first 2 games of the season. I thought they did a pretty good job of protecting Landry. Now, in the fourth quarter, they did give up a quarterback sack, but prior to that, I thought they gave Landry time to throw. The problem wasn't with the offensive line. It's just the fact that Landry was not steak knife sharp throwing the ball. Key 3, this is the big one right here. And I am going to go F for Oklahoma as far as finish what you started. We're talking about the red zone, first drive, Landry overshoots the tight end. You got to settle for 3 instead of getting 7. And then the Belldozer, second goal from the 1, you don't get squat. Bell doesn't get the ball, K-State recovers. Yeah. And then other situations too in the game, they had to settle for 3 right before halftime. Something that Trey McGuire's got to work on. He's got to know where he's at on the field. Once again, catching a ball out of bounds, not being in the right area in the end zone. He was open. Instead of being 7, you had to settle for 3. Again, that may not sound like a whole lot of damage as far as the red zone because they did get 3, but in a game like this, you had to have 7 because of the way the game was going. And then I go incomplete on isn't that special, talking about the special teams. The special teams, as far as the kick return, punt game, and stuff like that, not a huge factor from the OU perspective. It wasn't one of the best nights for Tressway punting the ball, but that's not why OU lost the game. And Justin Brown, fair caught a lot of those punts tonight. So he really didn't have an opportunity to show what he could do. So I'll go incomplete. For the Oklahoma Sooners, they could still have a good year. Obviously, no national championship, but then again, the last few years, that's pretty much been the case. But you can still have a good year. But the bottom line is you can't beat yourself like you did in this game. And Kansas State had a game plan, stuck to it, and in the end, it gave them a 24-19 win. Sooners thankfully get next week off. I don't know how they would have the mental capacity to play next week after that piece of crap performance on Saturday night. You got Texas Tech coming up in Lubbock 2 weeks from tonight on October the 6th, and OU's recent bad luck in Lubbock. There's no such thing as an automatic win the rest of the year for OU except the Kansas game. Other than Kansas, you cannot say that OU entering any game is going to be a surefire winner. Even the game it names Iowa against Iowa State, they usually pull off an upset or 2 every year. Right now, it seems like OU is primary upset victim. Maybe I should have known that when Gus Johnson, who I love for Fox Sports, was calling this game. March Madness, he typically called upsets, and of course last week he called the Stanford USC upset. So as much as I like Gus Johnson, his enthusiasm, maybe he should stay away from OU ball games. And if he does broadcast another OU game, maybe he should bet the house on the opposition. Again, congrats to K-State, and for Oklahoma, a very disappointing performance. The turnovers, too much to overcome, and we're going to see how the rest of this year plays out. Maybe I'm just having a knee-jerk reaction, but the way it looks right now, OU fans might want to buckle your safety belt. Could be a pretty bumpy ride. Where's my Alka-Seltzer? Boomer Sooner.